Hi, welcome to Midnight Sleep Whispers, where you can immerse yourself in a world of mysterious and spine-chilling horror stories. Perfect for drifting off to sleep or simply unwinding. Get cozy, dim the lights, and let's begin.
Thick twilight was descending on the cedar forest as Sheriff's Deputy Mark Hollis finally surveyed the area. It was late summer of 1992, and the pine-covered mountains of Washington smelled of the sharp smoke of distant campfires. Mark's team had spent the entire day hiking along a narrow trail by a mountain river, and at the forest's edge they discovered a tent camp that had been suddenly abandoned, with no visible sign of a struggle. The tent stood amid tall grass. Nearby lay a rusty cooking pot and a broken mug painted with a bear. Everything looked innocently childlike. A gentle mist clung to the grass, and the wind swayed the branches of the trees. But Mark could not shake an uneasy feeling. A woman of about 60 stood near the camp, holding worn photographs to her chest. The photographs showed a sturdy man holding a fishing rod and his smiling son, about 8 years old. Mark's heart sank. It immediately became clear whom they were looking for. The woman's face went pale, and tears glistened behind her tired eyes. She told them that her husband and son had come here to fish and were supposed to return to town on Monday morning, but they never came back. Her words barely escaped her throat. She seemed both calm and desperate at the same time. The sheriff quickly organized a search operation. 2 experienced volunteers with dogs went up the northern slope, while Mark and his partner Roy headed south. The forest was thick and treacherous. Fallen logs, loose debris, and thorny bushes made it difficult to get through. Roy walked beside him, ears alert, growling as if sensing every rustle of the wind. Not a single clear footprint or scrap of clothing appeared, only the forest moss covering the trail, hiding any irregularities. The day sped by in silence and anticipation, neither sound nor movement, only the rhythm of their heartbeats and the whisper of the wind overhead. When the last rays of the sun slipped behind the peaks, most of the searchers began packing up to head home. The sheriff's crew started breaking camp. Some went to their vehicles, others gathered their dogs. All were returning to base. Mark volunteered to stay with the woman until morning. After all, it would be frightening for her to be alone here at night. The chief agreed reluctantly. Susan nodded in thanks and sat down by the fire. They lit a fresh campfire and spread out their sleeping bags next to the tent. The forest around them became cloaked in a cold fog, and overhead the first stars glimmered faintly. Silence deepened, and a feeling of unease kindled again in Mark's chest. The fire crackled under the starry sky. Its warmth curled at Mark's feet, and the shadows of trees danced around him. He leaned back against a log and warmed his hands over the fire. All around, a muted night silence reigned, only the solitary hoot of an owl piercing the darkness. Roy grumbled softly in his sleep, and Mark tried to focus on the crackling wood, convincing himself that nothing here could scare him. But even that faint self-reassurance could not chase away the creeping dread that came with every shadow. Then a thin whistle floated from deep within the woods. Mark jumped and turned his head. It was dark and still, as though the forest were holding its breath. Roy tensed up, pressing against his master's legs. The whistle sounded again, a little closer. Exactly the familiar children's tune he had once heard long ago. Mark squeezed his eyes shut, but when he opened them again, his flashlight lit up only the intricate patterns of bark on the tree trunks. No figure appeared. The forest was silent, and only the wind played through the trunks, weaving patches of light among them. That whistle echoed again in waves, melding with the night's silence, and Mark's blood ran cold in his veins. His instincts argued with reason. Mark recalled that wolves or coyotes occasionally roamed these mountains. One whistle could be a warning, and two, a hunting call. But this sound was different. It seemed at once alluring and sinister. Something inside him pulsed with dread. Maybe it was a lost hunter, or one of those they were searching for. There was no reply. The night forest continued to guard its secret. Roy growled, turning his head toward the source of the sound. Even the dog sensed an intruder. Mark realized the forest was whispering about them through its shadows. But in the darkness, there was nothing to see except a few flecks of moonlight. Gradually, a muffled howl rolled through the forest, resembling a beastly roar. Mark's heart froze for a moment. The sound surged over the camp, tearing through the night's silence. It was not an ordinary wolf's howl, rather a half-hoarse, wild, piercing cry. It answered the whistle like an ancient echo. A cold shiver ran down his spine. Mark realized that the most terrifying part of the night had arrived, when one must not hesitate but fight. He froze, pressing his forehead to his knees and wrapping his arms around his head as if trying to hide from an invisible threat. The forest around seemed alive, each trunk as if whispering, "Who's there?" Mark closed his eyes and took a deep breath, wishing that all of this were just a dream. Roy pressed close to his master's legs, trying to soothe the anxious man. The whistle and the howl gradually faded, but as soon as Mark heard his own heart slowing down, he understood. The night would not release them until dawn. He tried to sleep, wrapped tightly in his sleeping bag. Only white embers remained from the fire, slowly warming the ground. Time passed slowly. Mark kept lifting his head and checking the fire again and again. The crackling of the logs came to his ears like distant whispers, as if the world around was relishing every sound, teasing him. But in the dim light of early dawn, the first rays of sun appeared, and at last the forest was revealed to his eyes in clear detail. Before dawn, Mark was already on his feet. He spotted a pair of fresh tracks on the trail, one large, one tiny. His heart jumped. These were clearly the footprints of the father and son. He clenched his teeth and sprinted after them across the cold grass. The tracks led up the slope, vanishing under leaves here and there, then reappearing on rocks. The first pale ray of sunlight broke through the fir crowns and outlined their silhouettes against the pink sky. Mark ran, feeling every breath and heartbeat, but around him was only the morning silence. It was as if the two had dissolved into thin air. A few seconds later came a bark from behind. Roy had returned to the trail and, sniffing the ground, sat down in front of Mark. It was as though he was saying, "There's no one up ahead." Fatigue and relief surged through Mark at once. The tracks had ended, and there was nothing more to find. The rescuers' jeeps arrived at the clearing, and the bustle of the new morning began. Mark gazed at the fog dispersing in the valley for a long time, feeling emptiness instead of answers. Those sounds and shapes would never disappear from his memory. On the next day, the sheriff announced the operation closed. No results and no extra words. The wind tousled the fallen leaves, and the forest quieted again, as if nothing had happened. Mark emerged from the thicket at first light and headed toward his car, feeling only emptiness instead of answers. Those unreal sounds of the night echoed loudly in his mind. He understood that what had occurred would remain a secret of the forest forever, and it settled inside him as a heavy memory of that wild, unpredictable dusk. Part 1. In the summer of 1992, the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest held a hush that only the night can bring. Deputy John had been working these roads for years, but he never lost the quiet thrill of duty. When the call came in about a missing father and his grandson, who had failed to return from their weekend camping trip, John and his partner, Deputy Russ, didn't hesitate. The small-town sheriff's team gathered at dawn, and by evening they reached the last campsite near the river where the two had been expected. They spread out with trackers and dogs, combing every narrow trail in the encircling woods for any sign. Yet no footprints led away from the site, no faint scent lingered. As darkness began to creep between the trees, the sheriff ordered most of the team back to town. It was then that Russ noticed a thin trail of footprints near the riverbank. Before the deputies could follow, night fell on them with a strange suddenness. John volunteered to stay behind to wait for morning. The others left, their vehicles fading down the winding road. Late at night, with only a crackling campfire for company, he sipped on stale coffee and stared into the flames, each pop and spark accentuating the heavy silence. Suddenly, a low whistle pierced the air. Not one of the dogs, but a human whistle, long and eerie. John jumped, snapping his head around. "Who's there?" he thought, peering into the shadows. The forest answered only with rustling leaves and distant calls of night creatures. Moments passed in unsettled quiet. Then, from the other side of the camp, the whistle came again. It wasn't playful or accidental. It was deliberate. John's pulse quickened. He swore softly in fear and confusion. Whatever was out there, it knew he was alone. He grabbed his flashlight and shone the beam into the darkness, but found nothing, just trees standing still under the pale moonlight. By dawn, he had found the footprints that Russ had pointed out. They led to the river's edge and abruptly stopped. There were two sets of prints, one large and one small, descending into the shallow water. John braced himself, eyes scanning the still pools in the early light. When he turned around, he saw two dark shapes up on the trail, less than 100 yards off. Two human silhouettes, watching silently from the tree line. His mouth went dry. Instinct warred with caution. Are those the people we're looking for? He wondered, heart pounding. The missing father and boy could be in front of him, but the sheriff's team was still miles away, and he was alone. He hesitated, mind racing. What if rushing them frightened them deeper into the woods? Only one choice remained. He decided to retreat quietly, to let them come closer instead. But as he took one step toward the shapes, they bolted. John gave chase, racing through ferns and brambles. He pushed through brush, but the figures dissolved into the morning mist as quickly as they had appeared. When he finally paused, gasping, John realized he was completely alone. No footprints, no vehicle, no whisper of the missing family. Just the distant river's murmur. Stop, he told himself, hand on his chest, struggling to calm his breath. The uncertainty was crushing. Had he chased dreamlike shadows? The distant echo of Linda's worried voice filled his thoughts. He needed to tell her something. Anything. John returned to town, reporting nothing concrete. The search dragged on for almost 2 weeks, though nothing turned up more clues. The sheriff did his best to calm Linda and her relatives, insisting these things happened. But John saw doubt in the sheriff's eyes. At night, he still revisited that riverbank and those wood-shrouded shapes in his dreams. He wondered who he had really seen, if they had any connection to Mark and Sam's disappearance. Often, he would sit awake staring out into the darkness, feeling that when he ran away, maybe those figures had not. Even now, more than 3 decades later, John still carries that uncertainty with him. He questions if those silhouettes were real people who needed help, or something else. Something watching him from the shadows. Sometimes, alone in the quiet of home, he still hears a faint whistling echoing behind him. Whether in the woods, in memory, or in his dreams, he cannot say. The thought that someone or something was out there watching that night changed him. Safety became a fragile notion, and every whisper of the forest put him on edge, a reminder of how once, in that silence, the line between myth and reality had blurred, and how he had not seen those figures again. Years passed, and yet another night lingered in Mark's mind. When he was 17 and his sister Lisa 14, they often walked home through the small valley community's playground on late summer evenings. The chain-link swings and half-forgotten jungle gym were their secret midday haunts. One hot night, with Lisa already dozing on the slide, Mark noticed a faint thud just ahead. Stone against metal. He froze. Another bang. Someone was throwing rocks at the swings, seemingly for amusement. Heart pounding, Mark jolted Lisa awake without speaking. She rubbed her eyes, confusion giving way to fear as the noise came again, louder and closer. Mark grabbed a nearby trash can lid and held it like a shield in front of them. He whispered reassurance as he barely believed himself. Maybe pranksters messing around. The next rock came flying in and struck the swings mere inches from Lisa. Both of them shrieked and dropped to the ground, covering their heads. In the chaos, Mark felt Lisa squeeze his hand with such force he winced. His mind raced. Was this just a frightening joke? A laugh or a "got you" would have turned this into a prank. But none came. Instead, an inhuman screech tore through the night, a banshee wail so piercing and guttural that it froze the blood in their veins. It echoed through the empty playground. Mark lunged toward the fence and pulled Lisa up. Shoving the lid before them like a flimsy armor, they sprinted through the darkness without looking back, adrenaline pushing them over the fence and onto the quiet street beyond. They didn't stop running until they were safely inside their living room and shutting the door behind them. Both were trembling uncontrollably. Lisa collapsed onto the sofa, silent and wide-eyed. Mark stood over her, trying to catch his breath, listening to the silence that followed the sound of wind rustling outside. In the eerie quiet, Mark finally broke it, his voice catching. It was just someone throwing rocks. A joke, okay? Lisa sat frozen, staring at the floor. After a tense pause, she gathered herself and whispered, "Maybe it was just kids trying to scare us." Her voice was quiet, laden with effort to sound convinced. Mark forced a weak laugh to ease the tension. In the living room, lamps glow. Both their faces were pale and twisted by fear. After a few long minutes, they put on a brave front. Mark announced calmly that it had been nothing serious, and Lisa reluctantly agreed. Who would believe them otherwise? They promised never to speak of it again. The terror of that night turned into an adrenaline-fueled laugh, a coping mechanism. By morning, the fear had retreated almost completely. They went on with life as usual, finishing high school and moving on. Decades later, Mark would recall the frayed nerves of that night and realize how thin the line had been between harmless fun and true horror. The prank that night might have been meant as a silly game, but when it took a dark turn, it became something neither of them would ever describe again. He remembered how vulnerable he had felt, and yet how relieved he was that nothing worse had followed. That awful screaming noise, with its brutal inhumanity, remained a blank spot in their memory. a detail best forgotten. Part 2. Michael never imagined returning home could feel this frightening. After a long day, he pulled into his driveway, eager to slip out of his work clothes and into the comfort of his own house. But as he stepped up to his front door, his blood ran cold. The door was slightly ajar, its latch broken. Michael's breath caught. Inside, the lights were off, and only the fading sunlight filtered through the windows. He pressed his ear to the frame. Silence, except for the faint rustle of an overturned potted plant on the porch. Hands trembling, he fumbled for his cell phone and dialed 911, voice cracking as he reported the break-in. The operator's calm reassurances were a small comfort. She warned him to stay outside until police arrived. Shaking, Michael waited on the porch as patrol cars pulled up with flashing lights. 2 officers swept through the house, weapons at the ready. Michael stayed at the threshold trying to steady himself. They found no one inside, no intruders hiding in closets or under beds. In fact, they found little evidence of forced entry beyond the broken locks. When Michael finally dared to walk through his own doorway, every detail seemed alien. The fridge door stood open a bit too wide, a lamp knocked over on the living room floor. Family photos on the walls hung crooked, their happy faces slanted in the dim light. In his bedroom, Michael knelt before the shattered jewelry box on the floor. Its contents, his old wedding band, his mother's pearls, were scattered and mixed with broken glass. He felt a dull ache of violation swirl in his gut. Someone had rifled through his most personal possessions and taken those heirlooms that hadn't been glued shut. In the living room, books were pulled from shelves and tossed on the couch. A coffee mug lay on its side, the pages of a ledger flipped wildly. Even his mail was scattered. It was as if someone had methodically touched everything he held dear, searching for something he couldn't yet identify. After the police finished their report, Michael was left alone amid the chaos. He carefully locked the door behind him and surveyed the wreckage. Each displaced object felt like a scar. They had dared to step into his sanctuary. The officers left, patting him on the shoulder and offering advice about alarm systems and spare keys. Michael smiled gratefully, but inside he felt hollow. No alarm and new locks could erase what had happened. In the days that followed, Michael repaired the damage he could. He fixed the broken lock and installed a deadbolt. He cleaned up and reorganized his life. But at night, he would lie awake, heart pounding at every creak. The house, once a shelter, now felt vulnerable, as if someone might appear out of the shadows. He double-checked all the locks before bed. He even bought a motion-activated light for the front yard. Weeks later, while exploring the attic, David discovered an old journal tucked in a corner. It had belonged to the previous homeowner. As he read, his blood ran cold. The entries described exactly what David had been experiencing. The nightly footsteps, the whispers, the growing dread. The last entry was hastily scrawled and ended abruptly. Night after night, he pored over the journal. A bittersweet comfort washed over him. He was not going crazy, and he was not alone. Someone else had walked those dark halls at midnight and felt the same chilling presence. Still, David's sense of home was forever changed. Even when the footsteps finally ceased, he often awoke with a start, wondering if someone still watched him from within the walls. The mystery of the past owner became his own, a reminder that some presences, seen or unseen, never fully leave the rooms they claim as home. Aaron's day had already been hard. Losing Whiskers felt impossible. He stepped out onto the front porch that morning and froze. The comforting sound of his cat Whiskers' meow that usually greeted him was absent. Whiskers, an orange tabby, had the habit of rubbing against his legs each day when he came home. Today, silence. Panic surged. Aaron searched every corner, under furniture, behind curtains, but only empty shadows returned his worried calls. As the afternoon sun began to fade, Aaron's panic turned desperate. He spent the day driving to shelters and posting flyers, asking neighbors, and still there was nothing. Days stretched into a week. Each sunrise found him on the porch, shouting Whiskers' name, fearing the worst. Finally, as hope was slipping away, a faint meow drifted from the driveway one evening. Aaron's heart leaped. There, hunched on the porch steps, was Whiskers, battered, thin, and trembling. Relief surged, quickly followed by horror. Whiskers' fur was matted and stained, one of her hind legs twisted awkwardly. She hissed softly whenever Aaron moved. Gently, Aaron scooped her up into his arms. He set her on the couch and brought warm water. Carefully, he examined her wounds. Deep scrapes on her hips, a swollen paw, old scars on her tail. The sight of his beloved cat, usually so lively and trusting, now cowering with fear, twisted something inside him. That's when Aaron noticed a small piece of paper pinned to Whiskers' collar. Hands trembling, he unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, but cold. It read, "She has been ours for some time." Dread seized his chest. Someone had been keeping Whiskers, effectively holding her captive. An icy anger and fear coursed through Aaron. He rushed Whiskers to the vet, cradling her gently. In the car, Aaron's thoughts raced. Who had taken his cat? Why give her back now? The vet cleaned and bandaged Whiskers' injuries, assuring Aaron she would heal, though the bruises looked deliberate. Aaron sat numb, listening to the vet's advice. Keep her indoors, monitor her. None of it addressed the burning question, who was behind this? That night, Aaron kept vigil with Whiskers on his lap, stroking her softly. The cat was exhausted, her eyes wide and watchful. Aaron's gaze kept flickering to her collar, to that cruel note. Did someone watch them now? Even here? Each mundane sound outside made him startle. He drew the curtains tight, heart pounding. Whiskers purred quietly in his arms, oblivious that she had been someone's captive. Over the next days, Aaron called the police to report Whisker's abduction. The detective was sympathetic but blunt. No obvious evidence, no prints. He suggested cameras and increased security. Aaron followed the advice, installing motion lights and a camera overlooking the yard. Yet every tick of the video recorder, every flash of the lens, felt like a small consolation. Meanwhile, Whiskers began to recover. Slowly, tentatively, she started coming back around. She played with her toy mouse again and begged for treats, though she never fully relaxed as before. For Aaron, however, the scars were deeper. He triple-locked the cat door and triple-checked the window every night. Now his home felt less like sanctuary and more like a fortress protecting a wounded soul. The note, yellowed and folded, remained a silent accusation on Aaron's dresser. He would sometimes stare at it late at night, the message echoing in his mind. Why had they done this? He realized that through Whiskers, someone had invaded his privacy. He slept with the lights on for a long time, afraid of shadows. Every quiet moment with Whiskers reminded him how helpless she had been. Though he loved her more fiercely than ever, Aaron knew he would never forget how vulnerable she had been in someone else's hands. It was an ordinary Saturday when Ryan's world tilted. He reached into the cabinet under the sink and accidentally struck the corner of the bathroom mirror. With a shattering crash, the glass exploded across the tile floor. Ryan's heart skipped. The small mirror had been part of the bathroom's character for years. Carefully, he gathered the fragments, recalling each sharp piece that had once held his reflection. After sweeping the floor, Ryan set to replacing the mirror. He ordered a modern framed one online, something durable and unassuming. Days later, he tore into the package and hung the new mirror. But taped to the inside of the box was a note. Curious, he opened it. "Hope this one doesn't break." The scrawled message sent a chill down his spine. He dismissed it as an odd joke. Someone must have seen the order, and carried on with his day. That night, brushing his teeth before bed, Ryan caught movement out of the corner of his eye. In the new mirror, a shadow seemed to twitch behind him. He turned quickly. Only the bathroom light and the patterned tile stared back. He shook his head, uneasy. Over the next days, a creeping discomfort took hold. Each time Ryan looked into the mirror, he felt eyes on him. Sometimes, mid-morning, his reflection would twitch out of sync, giving him a phantom start. At night, nightmares began. He dreamed shadows gathering behind the mirror, glowing eyes peering out from the glass. He woke each time in cold sweat, heart hammering. "Get a grip," he would tell himself. The mirror was just glass and aluminum. Finally, Ryan reached out to a friend who did paranormal investigations. On a stormy evening, the investigator arrived and examined the mirror. They tested it with an EMF reader and infrared cameras. Nothing. The mirror was plain and normal. No electronic bugs, no haunted spirit. "Must be in your head," the friend gently suggested, noting Ryan's tension. Ryan took the advice to heart. He began leaving the bathroom light on overnight and stepping out quickly after washing. The terror slowly faded. In time, his fear turned from expecting something in the mirror to guilt over believing in it at all. The note stayed in his wallet as a reminder. Sometimes the scariest reflections are in our own mind. Though life returned to normal, Ryan couldn't help but glance at his reflection a little warily each time, wondering if someone, somewhere, had slipped that note as a prank or as something more unsettling. Elliot's inheritance was the opportunity he'd been waiting for, a chance to leave the city behind and restore a beautiful old home. His distant uncle's Victorian mansion sat on the town's edge, filled with the charm of another era. As Elliot moved in and began unpacking, the creaks and sighs of the old house became a soundtrack. One day, while clearing the dusty attic, he found something odd. A heavy, bolted door hidden behind stacked trunks. This door was unlike the others. It had several thick bolts locking it from the inside. Curiosity piqued. Elliot tried the handle. It didn't budge. He banged on it lightly, but the room remained stubbornly silent. Why had it been sealed so securely? Determined to know, Elliot called a locksmith that afternoon. The man arrived, keys jingling. In the attic, they worked for nearly an hour on the bolts. When finally the door swung open, Elliot's excitement turned to confusion. Inside was nothing. It was completely empty. The walls were bare, floorboards clean, not even a speck of furniture or dust. It looked as though the room had never been used at all. Elliot stepped inside, moving slowly across the floor. The stillness was uncanny. His footsteps echoed loudly. The two of them glanced around in disbelief. "That's strange," murmured the locksmith. "Whoever sealed this probably expected something here." Alone again, Elliot could not shake the eeriness of that empty room. He ran a hand along the clean wall, not even cobwebs. It felt like the builders had simply shut it up and forgotten it. That night, Elliot lay awake, pondering the mystery. Had it held secrets, or perhaps someone? He started asking old neighbors and searching town records. Some remembered whispers about the house's previous owner, a reclusive man rumored to have locked himself in that room years ago, only to vanish. Days turned into weeks, but Elliot found no answers. The attic door remained unlocked, but Elliot often left it cracked slightly open. He kept the key on a hook by the stairs. The room, when he entered it now, felt less like a hidden cell and more like an unwelcome empty presence. Shadows seemed to shift at its corners. On quiet nights, he sometimes heard something, a soft creak or a sigh as he walked by, only to face silence. The house's air had changed. Elliot realized it was because of that empty room. It was as if the space itself remembered what should have been there. The sense of incompleteness and mystery became a part of his life. Though he talked himself to sleep, the attic's emptiness taught him a lesson. Sometimes the scariest thing is nothing at all. Even after time healed its initial chill, Elliot never forgot that the house had left a blank space in his memories, and that empty room held a quiet, watchful secret of its own. One fresh autumn night, Jack's routine was shattered. He went outside to leave for work and discovered his car was gone. The empty parking spot felt surreal. He registered the reality with a pounding heart. Someone had stolen his car. Jack immediately called the police. After filing the report, he spent anxious days coordinating with his insurance and figuring out transportation. Then, just as abruptly as it had disappeared, his car returned, left exactly where it had been parked. A police officer called. They found it abandoned and brought it home. Jack felt a complex relief. He scanned the car carefully. Its doors had been locked, windows intact. Nothing seemed stolen or broken. Everything looked normal. But Jack's instincts whispered that something was wrong. Grateful yet uneasy, Jack slid into the driver's seat to check the interior. His eyes fell on a small black device taped under the driver's seat. With shaking hands, he pulled it free. It was a recording device, wired into the stereo system. His breath hitched. Someone had been spying on him from inside his own car. At home, Jack connected the device to his computer. His heart sank as recordings played. First, a casual phone call with a friend at a cafe, then a clip from the conversation with the insurance agent, and even the ambient sounds of the city traffic. Each file confirmed it. Every private moment spent in his car had been recorded. His mind raced. Who could do this? And why had they returned his car? He called the police again and handed them the device. The officer frowned at the recordings, promising to analyze it. But Jack felt violated in a deeply personal way. For days he was paranoid, convinced anyone could be hiding just around the corner. He installed new locks on the doors and started parking in well-lit areas. He varied his commute patterns, always checking his rearview mirror. Though time passed and the immediate threat seemed to fade, Jack never fully shook the sense of exposure. The presence of that hidden camera served as a chilling reminder that someone had been inside his life, hearing his secrets. No new security measure could restore the trust he'd lost. From then on, Jack drove with a wary glance and made sure the windows were always up, an attempt to keep at least the walls of the car secure from prying ears. Emily arrived at the secluded cottage, expecting serenity. For days, she had looked forward to this getaway. Just her, a book, and the gentle sounds of the forest. The cottage delivered, until curiosity upended everything. One afternoon, while cleaning dust off the living room shelves, Emily noticed something odd behind the smoke detector on the ceiling. With trembling hands, she removed the alarm's cover to reveal a tiny camera lens staring out. and plastered on the wall nearby was a digital recorder with blinking lights. Horror replaced her momentary excitement. Someone had been secretly filming inside this supposedly private space. Emily took a deep breath and called the property owner at once. On the phone, her voice quivered as she held the recorder up to the speaker, demanding answers. The man stammered denials, insisting someone must have planted those devices, perhaps a prank. His tone, a mix of surprise and unease, offered little comfort. Within an hour he was at the cottage, feigning helpless confusion. He pulled the camera and recorder from hiding. "This shouldn't be here," he muttered, trying to keep calm. Emily's anger burned, but she stayed composed. As he made token apologies, she realized she no longer felt safe. That night, Emily packed her bags, leaving early. She notified the rental platform and police, reporting the invasion. The owner's voice on the phone attempted reassurance, but his words felt hollow. When she drove away, the idyllic silence of the forest felt eerie. Emily's mind raced with questions. Had someone watched her every move in that cottage? As she returned to civilization, the idea of hidden eyes haunted her. In the days that followed, Emily learned that the police took her report but found no easy answers. The devices had been carefully concealed, pointing to a calculated invasion of privacy. Emily, however, had gained wisdom. She realized that even a peaceful retreat could be violated. The hidden camera incident taught her to trust her instincts, to check hidden corners, and to cherish every private moment, now knowing someone might have unwittingly been watching. Tom's online life turned from mundane to terrifying. It began with simple messages on his social feed. At first they seemed like spam or jokes from an anonymous account, but then they turned personal. A comment on a recent photo read, "Nice dinner last night." Tom's blood ran cold. He hadn't posted anything about dinner, and only his roommate was supposed to know where he was. Days later, another message appeared. "I saw you at the gym today. Hope everything's okay." The account knew details of Tom's life he had never shared online. Panic set in. He rushed to change passwords and tighten privacy settings. But that only brought more messages. They became unsettlingly specific, referencing personal conversations and places he had mentioned only to close friends. One night, a message arrived that made Tom's heart drop. "I know where you live. I'm watching you." That direct threat was all he needed. He immediately went to the police with screenshots of the messages. Officers helped him with precautions, but explained that tracing an anonymous account was difficult. Tom took matters into his own hands. He stopped posting personal information, varied his daily routines, and asked friends to keep his plans off social media. He installed a security camera outside his home and slept with his doors locked tight. Yet, the sense of being watched lingered long after the messages stopped. Eventually, weeks passed in silence. Tom still checked over his shoulder and wondered who had been behind those anonymous comments. He never discovered the stalker. But the intrusion into his online life had changed him forever. The experience taught Tom the hard way how fragile privacy can be in a connected world, and he vowed never to take it for granted again. Casey's morning mail took a disturbing turn. He found an envelope in his mailbox addressed to John Doe. It was yellowed and had no return address. Shrugging, Casey tossed it aside, clearly a mistake. But he noticed the postmark was local. Curiosity made him open it. Inside was a single page of writing in block letters. As he read, dread settled in his stomach. The letter recounted his entire previous day. It described his morning jog route, the coffee shop he stopped at, even a private conversation with a friend. "Hope you enjoyed your day," it ended. Casey's hands shook. No one could have known those details, except someone who had been watching. Over the next week, more letters arrived, each more specific. One described the book he read on his front porch. Another described an argument he had with his partner, something shared only in confidence. The final letter ended with an even more chilling note. "I see you changed your living room furniture today. Very nice." Now the intruder knew the inside of his house. Frantic, Casey went to the post office. Officials examined the letters. No stamps, no handwriting matches, nothing to trace. They promised to help, but had no leads. Casey felt exposed. He installed a security camera pointed at the mailbox and another by his door. Each day, he checked and locked his mailbox. Soon enough, the camera footage caught movement late one night. A figure with a hood slipped a letter into the box and quickly disappeared. Casey grabbed his keys and ran outside, but the stranger was gone. Inside, with trembling hands, he read the new note. It detailed his evening routine and the change in his home decor, as if the writer had been there. That night, Casey looked out into the darkness, dread clawing at him. Whoever had done this was bold and close. He sat lit by a single lamp, watching the mailbox through the security feed, wary of any rustle. No more letters arrived after that final intrusion, but the silence brought little comfort. Casey remained vigilant. He often walked to the mailbox himself, watching for movement. He checked locks on doors obsessively. Every quiet night, he stared out windows, half expecting someone to be lurking. Casey never discovered the sender's identity. The experience taught him that even the most ordinary moments could be invaded. Each time he glanced at his mailbox or opened his door, he remembered those folded pages and the unknown eyes that had seen his life unfold. The words, written like an unwanted mirror of his days, served as a stark reminder of how exposed he had been and how careful he must now remain.